Hello. 11:02, I guess maybe we'll get started.
All right, let's do it.
Yep. Hi, everyone. This is Jill Lackett at the North Central Climate Science Center, and this is a monthly check-in. Robin will be our speaker for the first part. And just an announcement, this is the last time that we'll be using this USGS WebEx account. It's going away. Starting next month, you'll get a new, in the reminder, you'll get a new link to a Zoom video conferencing system that we'll be switching to. So stay tuned for that, but otherwise, Robin can get started.
Okay. Well, given that there's a substantial amount of uncertainty on a couple different dimensions of how we're operating over the next, I'll say, year or so, I have a bunch of things that I thought would be useful just to sort of bring back to top of mind for people and give you a sense of what the trajectory of a bunch of different elements of our system are going to be. So you see the kind of outline, remind people sort of how things are structured. We've got the hosting award process that's underway, and at the same time, we're building a plan for spending fiscal year 2018 funding, if and when we ever get any. And then we've been operating on working on the strategic planning process and having some conversations, and we've got some of the survey results and some things that are emerging, at least in my head, as I try to listen to people. So kind of an agenda to just bring people back to some of the administrative and bureaucratic stuff that is no fun at all, but it makes our life work or not. So I just wanted to remind people of the structure and give you some sense of numbers and context of how things are set up. This is roughly a $2 million enterprise. Most of it comes on the federal side. A quarter of it roughly comes to the university side. You see what they're used for. And then the biggest chunk of difference in between those two is the roughly $1 million research portfolio that we get most years. We'll see what we get this year. So that's just the structure, and you'll hear me talking about the hosting award. Well, when I was at headquarters, we believed that a $500,000 hosting award was too small, and we are looking to bump all of them up. There are at least 2 and maybe 3 that for the first round of 5 years were under, we're in the 500 to 600 or lower range. We're going to bring all of them up to roughly 900 to 1 million, or we hope to, given availability of funds. That's the trajectory that we've been on, is to try to get them roughly at that scale. It's not yet clear whether that increment to the university side will come out of the USGS side of the North Central Climate Science Center, or whether that'll be a system-wide balancing, because there are several CSCs whose awards will likely go up when we recompete them. The South Central went up, I mean the Southeast went up, and there's at least one other that's below the average, and we're trying to bring up. So a little bit of unclarity about whether we're going to grow overall or whether we'll just shift the allocation between these 2 bins. So the other set of uncertainties that's going on is we have a hosting award that structures our relationship with CSU and thus to the other academic institutions in the portfolio, in the consortium. And you see the cycle of it. We had an original 5-year award that ended in 2016. Headquarters USGS wasn't prepared to recompete at that point, so we've been extending it a year at a time. Until this year, when the new administration came in and is keeping our extensions on a very short leash. They've been going out at 1 to 3 months at a time, and we believe we've got some funding moved out to March 2018, but not a full year for this current award. And you see the sort of bottom left there is this award structures who we work with, how much money is available, again, going from roughly $500,000 to closer to $1 million, and how we interact, what the touch points are, and how we work across the university federal side. The schedule for getting to a second award is kind of funky. We hope to get, we've got a proposal in from CSU. That proposal has been reviewed. The target award for that is sometime in early to mid 2018. It's a pretty review process. Our awards people have to do all kinds of auditing checks and this sort of thing. So it takes a long time after the technical decision's made. And so we're in a position where what we're trying to do is make sure that we keep the extensions, the funding extensions going until we get a new award in place. So we're working on the old award and extending it a month or 2 or 3 at a time while we're trying to get through this second 5-year hosting award process. So we're in the middle of that. It won't end, and the new funding and all that won't be in place and formalized at least until March, and more likely late in the second quarter of, well into the second quarter of 2018. The other more short-term uncertainty is that we're in fiscal year 2018. We don't have a federal budget. In fact, we haven't had a federal budget since I've come back to USGS 8 years ago. The current CR ends Friday. It's looking kind of ugly, and there's either, the options are there'll be a very short shutdown over the weekend, or they'll manage to kick it into January sometime. We hope, because if you go down a couple notches, we have to have our funding decisions made and all of our documents submitted by June 15th. There's only so long we can wait before we start an RFP process and get proposals in. So Aparna and I plan to release the RFP in early January, but somewhere in here we've got to figure out how much money we have to put towards this. And I'm trying to not overload the system, so a lot of people write proposals that we end up not having any chance of funding. So you'll see a little bit of strategy around that. But somewhere in between this period, we've got to lock down how much money we have, how many proposals we actually can take from folks, et cetera. Or else these deadlines below start to slip and we run the risk of not being able to move our money out during the fiscal year. So we've got a constraint coming here that we don't know how much money we have, Congress is enacting, but we've got to start moving. And so I'll apologize in advance. There's a chance there will be proposals written for opportunities that we can't fund, and I don't know how to not do that given the uncertainty we have. So we'll try to minimize the uncertainty and not ask for proposals that we know we're not going to fund, but there may be some dodginess in this schedule as we go ahead. So when we've been thinking about funding, a couple things. Obviously, the second point, we don't know how much we've got and when we're going to know it. The first point has been part of our strategy for also fiscal 17. We're really not really being cautious about making multi-year commitments. We don't want to end projects in the middle if the funding goes away. If we go into those kinds of situations, and the RFP will sort of leave the opportunity open for you to propose that, but we'll have to make multi-year projects be really segregatable into a first product, a deliverable after the first year, because we just have so much uncertainty about our funding that assuming that we'll be able to fund years 2 and 3 and finish the project is not a great assumption. So we want to make sure we get something useful out of the product.
Can I make a comment?
Yes.
So this is Aparna, and I just wanted to add that we are doing an RFP, but we are only asking people who we have funded in the past or we have worked with through the consortium or through our liaison program to apply. And we're asking that anyone who wants to apply contact us ahead of time and work with us on their idea. As Robin mentioned, we don't want people to write a proposal that we already know is not something that's feasible or that is workable. So we're calling it an RFP because we are open to new ideas, but it's not a full and open RFP in that there are some constraints, and we really, really want people to work with us before they submit something.
Yeah. Yep. So 2 things to follow on that. One is that as soon as we can, we'll try to do a full and open RFP. It's really hard for us in these halfway situations when we don't know how much money we have, and so we don't like to do, because they generate more proposals, and that's more work on people's part, and if we're not going to have the money, it doesn't make sense to do that. So we'll do that hopefully in fiscal 19 if we get some clarity. The second point is that this list of continuing and emerging themes here really indicates where we think we have a team that we're working with and we're going to continue. So there's some things that we've been working on and we're going to increment along and move forward. So the work that we're doing with Wildlife Conservation Society and others, the work we're doing with the Park Service on Devil's Tower, and the ecological drought work that has been funded by headquarters, but we're picking up some, are extensions within existing frames, essentially. The ones that are in red are ones that we don't have anybody in mind or in sight, and so those are in some ways more open than the others. And so State of the Science, we're beginning what I'll call a series that we hope has multiple publications in it, that are State of the Science short reviews of existing work that produce a handout level document for management consumption and a deeper dive document for people who need to look up the references and whatnot. So we have one topic that we're specifically calling for, but the other there is all of you know some topic that would be very useful for the community to know what the current state is. There's going to be a window in this RFP to say, I could write a synthesis document on X topic, and these are not huge awards, $50,000 or whatever, in that scale, but put something together, get it reviewed, get a publication out. So there's an opening for that, for you to think about where you know a topic that the community would be interested in getting. Sage grouse and sagebrush is a really big deal, and what this will be is there's at least one and perhaps 2 already published needs assessments that we will say, you have to show us exactly what chapter and verse in this needs assessment you're responding to, and how you're going to work with an agency to do this. So this isn't blue sky sage science. It's really identified needs, and some of them are quite practical needs. What is the seeding protocol for reseeding after fire? How do you get the best seed production in a facility for gathering it? Some of them are real nuts and bolts on the ground kinds of things. So that's got a very targeted needs assessment that if people want to be successful, they'll write very closely to that. And we'll probably have both the states and BLM represented on the selection process there for them to help us make sure they're really the highest priorities in the management world. Ecological transformation is a topic that came up at the National Adaptation Forum. There was a session there. Steve Jackson in the Southwest Climate Science Center is, I'll say, the intellectual lead on this. From my point of view, he's got lots of gray hair and has thought about this stuff. And it's an interesting conjunction with the Park Service and the Fish and Wildlife Service right now, who are trying to figure out how to deal with ecological transformation on a policy level. How do you tell a park manager when they should resist transformation or when they should facilitate it? And what are the legal issues around parks, species? Each of those agencies has some, hard legislative lines. So this is kind of an open call. Jackson may also frame a question, and we will keep in close connection with the Southwest folks for thinking about what it is we want to work on. But the notion of transformation, when we can predict it, project it, influence it, any of those kinds of things are the kinds of work that we're looking for. And the last of the open ones is that we're experimenting with the notion that it might be useful to have a planning grant that is just the planning and early engagement part of a co-development process. And so we're essentially saying, if you need some time and money to scope out with partners what a project that would be of high value and would be a serious co-development effort, and you need to have 2 workshops of 20 people to bring those together, well, let us fund that, and then you'll be early in the queue, high in the queue for funding of the real project that might emerge from that.
And just to add to that, if you think it's something that the actual proposal or project is not appropriate for the CSC to fund, so maybe you're thinking of a couple of human natural systems grant from NSF, which is sort of larger in scope than our capacity, that's still something we would be interested in helping to facilitate, and we would be open to working with you on that. Yep.
Yeah. So targets of NIFA grants, any of the NSF, any of those, that's a great use for this scale of funding. So the last 2 are kind of already identified, and the first one is when I was in headquarters, I encouraged all of our centers to work with their neighboring centers on projects, joint projects that go over joint resources. The Glacial Lakes territory spans the northeastern region and our region, the sort of Minnesota, North Dakota, et cetera. And they've got a project that I believe will expand from the existing Lake State region out into the Dakotas and either Nebraska or Kansas, I can't remember which. So that's essentially taking an ongoing northeastern project and helping them expand into our territory and cover stuff for our resources. And the last one is a project that we tried at headquarters and failed, and we're going to try a slightly different approach to it, which is the basic concept is that it would be useful for us to be able to have a database or a place to look for vulnerability assessments that had been done on resources in our region. A cold water fish assessment is probably applicable in more places than the initial place it was done for, and being able to locate assessments on species or habitat types or geographic areas and either learn from them or not have to redo them is a concept that we've been trying to get some work on. So a little bit of resources to see if we can pull together a useful database and a process for keeping it current. So that's kind of what we think we're going to be asking for in the 18 proposal, call for proposals. And again, this could accordion, things could drop off depending on how the funding shows up. And maybe I'll stop there for a second because I'm going to do some stuff on the strategic planning end, but let me just stop if there's questions on the host award or the science funding stuff. All right.
Anybody raise a hand or chat it or anything?
Stay tuned for the RFP then.
No.
Okay. So stepping back, remind folks that this is a network of 8 centers plus the headquarters, 9 centers. So what I'm talking about here is the network strategic plan that is in development right now, but getting there. And I've said before, it wraps around us, but it doesn't constrain us very much. I don't think you'll see anything in this slide or the next one that really keeps us from doing anything we want to do. But it does clarify some stuff. So mission statement, these 4 pillars are doing science with managers, working with government partners, university partners, training, and working at national and global scales. None of that pinches very much. And this slide actually represents some progress. When we started with the new Trump administration political appointees, we were really tightly constrained to Department of the Interior. We've now made a successful case with them that states, tribes, and other indigenous communities in the islands, et cetera, are integral parts of working with the interior agenda. So we have a pretty open field to work with folks on the ground doing this stuff. And then, again, the pillars and goals. We do partnerships, we do science, we do capacity building, we do communications. Under each one of those are objectives, but again, none of them bind us. There are things that we can use to explain, guide, et cetera, our strategies. And so transition, I'm going to stop babbling in a minute, and Aparna's going to talk some more, but I've now spent a bunch of time chatting with people, not necessarily all that formally, but I've met with all the federal agencies, or all the big federal agencies in the region at a reasonably senior level. We convened the states. We've done some surveying. These are emerging, and I don't say this isn't done, but these are some of the things that I'm seeing shape our space. And ESA is a driver of state concern, and from my point of view, states are a really important partner. So I think you'll see some continuing work around species and ESA and states and that sort of cluster of activities. The sage-grouse issue is going to be a big deal to everybody involved, and so there's some logic to spending some time on that. As somebody said to me, it's so big that it would be silly to ignore it. It has risks. This is a super political affair, but I think ignoring it is a worse risk. People talk about drought, and we're going to continue with that. We have some social science investments we're going to make in fiscal 18 that's following on from the work that the headquarters shop funded. And we had things like Eddy and the Wind River work ongoing. I think we need, as a group, to have a conversation about where does drought go? What's next in drought? Is it another reservation besides Wind River? Is it deeper at Wind River? Is it Eddy down some of those tracks? So I think over the next few months we need to think about what's a good track from that. Synthesis on several input vectors. People want synthesis, and so that's the state of the science strategy that I mentioned earlier. Scaling up, I still keep my eye on the issue that there's only so many one-off and one-on-one enterprises, engagements we can have. And so having a larger impact than working with one manager is a challenge, given how much we encourage co-development. So we've got a funny set of incentives going here. But the notion of working with the Park Service on building a way to support an RSS resource strategy, stewardship strategy development, almost to the point where we could franchise that. I don't know where this goes, but if we learn how to do that better, we might be able to operationalize it. I think there's a bunch of things that come around that we're now paying high-end PIs that we probably can't afford to do the second, third, fourth, and fifth of those with the same, pay structure. So we've got to figure out how to get more bang for the dollars that we have. And this notion that we did in fiscal 17 of taking some projects and giving them some additional increment to move them out to other audiences or expand the training or what have you, those are kinds of things that I think we'll have to think about more and will be part of the strategy that we come up with out of this set of conversations. And then again, this transformation. I don't know where that's going. It seems it's applicable to several very concrete decisions, like how you manage after a fire. The sage grouse folks are really seriously wondering about sage transition. And so I think it's emerging as a possibility. It may come or be overridden. But so those are things that have come into my head. And I will stop babbling and give the phone to Aparna.
Sure. So Robin stole some of my points, but hopefully there's still enough interesting material here. We did what was called a quality of service survey for the region. Essentially, we were able to get fast-track USGS approval to do a very, very short survey of stakeholder needs in order to be able to provide better quality of service. And I'm going to flip the results and show you the demographics before I actually show you the responses. We sent this out to people who had previously engaged with the center, maybe attended the Open Science Conference, and so they were sort of on the regional level for federal agencies, people who work at other USGS science centers, BLM, Fish and Wildlife Service, Park Service, and then also the state fish and wildlife chiefs for each of our states in our region. So we were able to get a pretty good geographic representation for the region. For the people who clicked other, they worked a little bit with some boundary states, and then there were folks who indicated that they worked nationally. So they work in the region, but they also work outside of the region. But nobody who flagged something like they work in Hawaii. For the types of organizations, we did have a heavy loading of federal agency representation as opposed to state or local. 2 people did click other, and both I would consider to represent federal viewpoints. One said they were a contractor, and another said they were a USGS scientist and not on the management side. So just keep in mind as we go through the results that there is a bit of a skew towards the federal agency perspective as opposed to the state perspective. The first question that we asked was basically to support their work in the next 1 to 5 years, do they want to understand climate change, like how climate will change? Do they want to understand how those changes will impact resources or places? Or do they need guidance on adaptation to cope with those impacts? So we kind of tried to break the themes out into sort of the physical climate system, the impacts, and then adaptation. And basically they had to click and drag these in the hierarchy of importance to them. And if you look at this as a plot, you can see that for most people, understanding how climate will change is not that important as it is to understand how changes will impact systems and what adaptation strategies are available to them. The next question that we asked was how we should invest our resources, and we gave them 6 options. One was to conduct new research. The second was to synthesize existing research. The third was to hold trainings. The fourth was develop decision support tools. The fifth was convening science management dialogue, and the sixth was to provide staff for technical assistance. And basically they, again, had to click and drag these in order of importance to give us kind of a ranking of what they would prefer us to spend our time on. And if you plot these out, you can see that synthesis of existing science by far was the #1 priority. What was interesting to me was that for conducting new scientific research, a lot of people either ranked it very high or very low. So I think that there are 2 sets of users, one who don't have the capacity to ingest new science in their processes, and in that case, they just want to know, what is out there already. I don't have the time to have a 2-year project that looks for opportunities for new science. And then the other stuff kind of fell in the middle of everything. We also asked what kind of science theme they would like to see the center focus on. So in the first 5-year span, Dennis and Jeff had identified drought as a primary scientific topic to focus on. And we wanted to kind of do a gut check of, is drought something that they still care very heavily about, or are there other themes that we should incorporate? And you can see that most respondents felt that drought was still very important. This was check boxes, so they could check more than one theme if they felt that was necessary. And then some other themes emerged as potentially important as well, such as impacts on species or habitats of conservation concern. And we came up with these examples based on our interactions with the management community that we had had so far. We did give them the other option, and they had a text box they could fill in. And so we got sort of a span of responses in that text box. A couple of people still thought the water cycle was important, but that it needed to be considered in terms of how it influenced other issues like snow seasonality or connected to invasives or fire. And so you can see that there were some other ideas of what kinds of things we should be thinking about. We also asked about what kinds of topics they would like to see us give as trainings. Anything from Climate 101, the basics of climate science, all the way to sort of scenario planning and adaptation planning. And this is a little bit easier, again, to ingest as a plot. So you see for extremely important and very important people, we're picking scenario planning, vulnerability assessments, adaptation planning. The Climate 101 was kind of important, but not that important. So I think it reinforces some of that earlier response that they're not that interested in learning about the basics of how climate is changing in the region. They really want to know about the impacts and what to do about those impacts. And then we allowed people who picked other to put in some text, and you can see there were a number of people who were interested in invasive species and their link to climate change. And then the last question that we asked was if our staff here or our investigators are providing technical assistance, do they want to be engaged in a consistent long-term process, or do they want to be able to call on us for short-term one-offs? And a very large percentage of the respondents said that they would rather engage with us consistently over a long-term planning process. And I think this is the place where we lamented the fact that we had to have such a short survey because we thought about this set of responses a lot, and one of the points that came up was that maybe people already feel like they get some short-term one-off support from us, so that's something that we are doing well, and they want to be able to have that longer-term support as well. So, yeah, I wish that I could ask lots of follow-up questions, but given that it was a 7-question survey and 2 of them were about demographics, I still think we got some interesting ideas out of the responses. So I will stop there in case anyone has questions about the strategic planning or the stakeholder survey or where we plan to go from here.
Yep. Or anything else for that matter.
Hi, this is Arjun from Montana State University.
Yeah, go for it.
I have a quick question about the FY18 proposal, call for proposal.
Yeah.
So when is the deadline? Did you set up the deadline, or just you are talking about the idea you can sponsor during that period?
So this is roughly the schedule. So we hope to get it out in early January, and March 30th is pretty much as late as we can go in order to make those later deadlines. So presuming everything rolls out correctly, you'll have January, February, and March to do the putting together and writing and contacting us. Yeah.
Yeah, and our goal with this, as I mentioned earlier, is to work with the investigator as they develop the proposal. So we are not doing statements of interest this time around. We are just doing full proposals, which is why we want the investigator to contact us early in the process, and we're giving them 3 months to kind of work through writing the proposal. We really, really don't want people to spend time putting together, 7 pages for
Yeah, I totally understand. And would you please circulate, send this PowerPoint so that we can have some idea about the fields or the area you are considering?
Yeah, so we have an announcement that we are working on right now, and when that second week of January, when the call goes out saying we can now accept proposals, it will have a document attached to it with more information about the tracks that we're looking at, so the synthesis versus planning grants, and detailed sort of descriptions of the kinds of things that we would like to see.
Right.
So it would be the same as the previous FY17, like 1 year, almost of the 1 year proposal, like that, right?
Yeah, pretty much. We're really heavily weighted towards 1 year. If there's something compelling, okay, but really have to talk to us, and again, we probably have to have some ability to say we got something useful if we only fund it for 1 year. So there's a little bit of,
I would say for, the second year, again, there's probably going to be uncertainty on our budget from Congress, and there may be delays in terms of when Congress passes the budget. So our goal for a multi-year project would be for it to be modular with interim deliverables in the event that our FY19 budget is cut. We can not fund the subsequent years of that project and still have a final product or some kind of product out of it. So that would be our guidance, is if you're going to make an argument for a multi-year project, really think about how you would break each annual component apart.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
So essentially there'll be write-ups for most of the items, the top 3 in black and then the 4 red ones. We'll have some, the RFP will have a section that says, if you want to write to this, here's what we're looking for.
Yeah, I will definitely, I'm copying it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Imtiaz. Aparna, it was nice to look at the survey results. I guess the bulk of the answer that were in majority, I was probably part of that as well. But I was, with regards to the way the climate questions were framed, and I was just wondering if there was one component missing in that much of the climate work we have done is really trying to see what's the relevant climate to the system, what are the sensitivities, and so when you frame it that would you like to understand the impact from climate rather than understand what Climate 101 is or what's the climate in your region. So there's that climate piece that fits somewhere in the middle where what's the relevant climate sensitivities that your system, or what's the relevant climate that your system is sensitive to, and also, and that looking at different extremes. So I wonder if you had that and what the response would have been.
Yeah, I agree. I think considering it from a stakeholder perspective, that's tied to impacts in their mind, as opposed to just saying, you know, climate is warming and precipitation is shifting. They want to know, well, you know, climate warming in spring results in things blooming earlier or something like that. I do get what you're saying, that maybe we should have refined the sort of 3 prongs here, but we were, because of that expedited process, we were encouraged to make this as streamlined as possible.
Right. So basically, just for our own understanding, and much of the climate service we have provided is trying to understand what, to some degree, what the stakeholder wants. Sometimes they really are not 100% sure themselves. And so I think going forward, we can, it would be good for us to know, you know, what aspect of climate information, I mean, how do they want to get the information, and what that looks like in some manner.
Yeah, MTL, so this is interesting. Some of this comes, there are some CSCs that are still doing just straight ahead downscaling. And that, I put that firmly in the first bin. I think a lot of what you do is really spanning the first and second bins, which is understanding that variability and then kind of applying it. So some of this is kind of encouraging, and we know that you can't do the second one without doing the first one. So this is really a build upon kind of sequence. You can't do the third one without doing the others either. So we, I don't think it's maybe a nuance of it or making sure we're going, I mean, I think exactly the work that you've been doing is exactly moving from 1 into 2 in that sense. And so I think that's, you know, the kind of thing we're talking about.
And I do think that this comes up in the other text box for the primary focal area. So, for example, you know, it comes up scenario development, climate sensitive, kind of the climate sensitivity of management decisions, holistic solutions, or how drought touches other topics.
Yeah, I saw that, and yeah, that's good to see that. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think that theme of the changes in timing or intensity of certain parts of the climate system shows up, but very closely tied to the impact side of things as opposed to the physical climate system side of things.
Yep. Yep.
Thanks.
Questions, comments?